All right. I wanna try to take a step back now. We've been talking a lot about the priests, and if I were teaching this class in historical order, I might have actually started with Deuteronomy first. I might have started with D rather than starting with P, but I've been going in chronological order in terms of the history, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But if you have the sheet that I gave out several months ago that looks like this, it had the chart of the J, E, P, and the D on the top. If you have it, pull it out. If I have any extras, I'll pass them out. I have a few extra, just so you can see it. But I want to try to give you a historical context about what happens to P that makes P so unique and interesting. And we're going to do that at the same time as looking at a few sources. Does anyone else want one? Got some down there. There's another one. Got some over there. Okay. All right. And you can share also.
Oh. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I do have that. But
Need another one?
where do we have it?
There are two very important historical moments in Jewish history. Hello, Victor. How are you? Yo, Simon. How you doing? You guys got here by yourself? Your mom or dad didn't bring you today? Oh, there she is. Okay. There were two historical moments that perhaps had the greatest impact on the way that the Torah or the Bible gets put together. One of them happens in the year 722 BCE, and the other one happens in 587, 86 BCE. So you probably all know what happens in the second one. What's the second one?
The fall of the first.
Right, so it's the destruction of the first temple. By whom?
Babylonians.
By the Babylonians. What happens in 722 BC?
Fall of the Northern Kingdom.
Yes, it is the fall of the Northern Kingdom by whom?
The Assyrians, I believe.
Yes. There's other things that happen. There's in particular the one that happens in 701 of BCE, which is the story when the Assyrians make their way from the northern kingdom down to the southern kingdom, what we call Judah. And there's a fight that would, in theory, break out between the Assyrians and the Judahites, except, that's right, King Hezekiah is in control of the people. And when they get there, what do they find?
The Assyrians?
When the Assyrians come to the southern kingdom, to Judah, what do they find?
Didn't they enter Jerusalem and found it empty?
They found Jerusalem empty. Why?
The Jews are underground.
That's exactly right. Anyone here
Where
been
the
to
waterway.
Hezekiah's tunnels?
Yeah.
Hezekiah built tunnels underneath the temple, and he brought everyone down underneath, and they all hid when the Assyrians came to town. So the Assyrians thought, it's desolate, we're just going to leave and abandon it. We've done what we needed to do. Let's move on. So this was another major moment. But the major reason I want to highlight these two pieces is because something unbelievable happens in terms of the way that the worship system works during this period and this period. We're going to call this First Temple. And this is going to be the beginning of the Second Temple. In the First Temple period, where did authority live?
Jerusalem.
In the north, it belonged in the north. In the south, it belonged in Jerusalem.
Okay, you're both right. Okay? It did live in Jerusalem, but only for the southern kingdom.
Right.
Say more about what you were just saying, Stan.
Well, the northern kingdom set up their own altars.
Yes.
And was
It was
Shiloh
decentralized, exactly. If you have your book, Who Wrote the Bible, and you look in the back in the maps, okay? Now in the very back of the book, there's several maps. It doesn't matter so much which one you look at. I'm going to look at the one that says Judah and Israel. Okay? You will notice that there are actually several city centers that were home to where the people lived. But they were also home to what Stan said correctly, which is they were centers of worship. The northern kingdom, in places like Shechem and Beth El and Shiloh, were all places where people would go to pray. They would set up a system of worship, an altar system in those places so that they didn't have to go to Jerusalem. Not only did they not need to go to Jerusalem, they didn't want to go to Jerusalem. And what we end up having here, where's my marker go?
And I took the wrong one.
Is that in the northern kingdom versus the southern kingdom, during 722, we have two radically different systems of worship. If you were to characterize these two systems of worship based on J, E, P, and D, who would you say lives where? Which God lives where?
E lives in the north.
You got it. E lives up here, and J lives down here. Now, what do I mean by that?
was this book?
They call God Elohim.
Yes.
And Israel.
Right, exactly. Look, if you just look at that map as a quick example, look at one of the names of the city centers in the north. It's called Beth El. It's on Alameda de las Pulgas. The rabbi, no, sorry, wrong place, okay? But Beth El was the house of El,
Judah.
as opposed to places in Judah that were connected to the god
Yahweh.
Yahweh. Before the destruction of the northern kingdom, you could make the argument, even before the destruction of the southern kingdom, you can make the argument that each region of what we'll call today Israel had regional gods, not one total god. And the major shift that happens after 587, 86 is we move from this multiple narrative of multiple gods to one centralized form of worship. Barbara.
Besides calling God by a different name, were their practices similar?
Oh, no, they were not
They
similar.
were not. So did they believe they were worshiping different gods?
Yes.
They did not feel they were part of one.
Yes. And we actually had evidence from historical evidence of altars and idols that were created to suggest that they were worshiping, in fact, different gods.
So why do we look back and say it was all Israel?
Who won?
It's a great question.
64 million.
Wonderful.
But let's see if we can answer Barbara's question. Why do we look back and say that it's all one? Siva?
The winner writes the
That's
history.
exactly right. The
But-
winner writes the story. If you go to that map for a second, look what happens around the years 722 to 539. Between the time that you have the fall of the north, the destruction of the south, and coming back in 539 to 515 by Cyrus to rebuild the temple, what happens to J and E? They come together. Which makes us think that in the end, one narrative reigns supreme. And the winner gets to tell the story. We've never, by the way, ever had that in history.
But it's
post
because
this.
the people from the north moved to the south?
No, not in some ways, yes. In some ways, yes, some of them did. Most of the people in the north, what happened to them?
Killed.
They were either killed
Dispersed.
or they were dispersed. They were sent into exile. They become what we call the 10 lost tribes. What'd you say?
They become Pashtuns.
Yes, Pashtuns, right?
You
Okay.
say it merged. What merged?
Good question. So what is it that's merging?
Is it that simple to say that the J won because they got combined, they got
Yes.
integrated?
I can't say that J won. But what I can say is J and E become unified as a part of one narrative where we see remnants of each source stand on its own. It's kind of like if you've ever looked at Friedman's book, and you'll literally see a passage where every couple of lines it's J and every couple of lines it's E, it's back and forth. They become harmonized into one narrative, if you will. But something else happens around this time, which is the emergence of what we're going to call P and D. The priests come in and they rewrite a story, if you will, or they add to the story, or they change the story in order to be able to convey a particular narrative. What would the goal of the priests be once the northern kingdom is off? We're done with the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom has been destroyed. We're recreating a temple system. What would the priests want the narrative to be?
Sacrifices.
Sacrifices, to
Law.
To one-
sacrifice and laws to
One God.
one God.
No more,
But
no more ambiguity.
no more ambiguity.
Centralization of worship into Jerusalem.
Centralization of worship into Jerusalem. Yep.
We talk about each of these segments, geographic segments,
Yep.
having a different God. None of them worship more than one God.
Presumably no.
Okay.
Although there
I mean, they-
was evidence that there were multiple gods in geographic areas, or one god that went by more than one name.
But for all practical purposes, each group was monotheistic.
Presumably.
Okay.
But at the time of the prophets, which we're talking about here,
Yep.
I think we see continuous backsliding and the worship of Baal and the gods of the surrounding region, and it's what the prophets are railing against.
By the way, we actually have evidence in the prophetic names of which gods they're working with, right? So if you have Amos, Micah, I don't-
Isaiah?
Yeah, sure, Hosea. You're going to get one group. They're going to be in the northern kingdom kind of talking to El. But if you have people like Isaiah, Jeremiah, etc. I'm going to write it in Hebrew for a second. You have a God of Yah, of J. Isaiah, by the way, is prophesying just before the temple is destroyed and after the temple is destroyed. Jeremiah during the destruction, or just right before and right after. So these are prophets that are responding to the destruction of a god or to a worship system that will reconstitute it. Even Hezekiah, right? Josiah, all of these people with that name are leaders that are perpetuating their understanding of worship to the God Yahweh. And so once the temple is destroyed, the northern kingdom is out of the picture, you can rewrite your tradition to be focused on one God in one place so that everyone is coming together and doing the same thing. Barbara?
I sort of remember reading this, but it was...
It's so a long time ago. I know.
So the
think
Northern
of it.
Kingdom had written documents, and the Southern Kingdom and the priests kind of integrated.
Yes.
and combined.
We're going to go to the priests in just a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
Am I correct in remembering that a lot of the northern prophets said that sacrifice really isn't necessary?
Correct.
So they said,
What do they say instead?
um,
What do you need?
do justice,
That's right, we need behavior.
love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
Yes, so that's Micah in particular, who's a northern prophet, but that's okay. But what you're talking about is the integration between sacrifice and law, right? Doing mitzvot and sacrificing. So there's a different kind of behaviors that go along with it. Yeah.
So I'm mentally in, because I'm reading The Liar's Gospel, which is written by Naomi Alderman, who wrote Obedience, which I also read, which I'm encouraging everybody, if you haven't seen Obedience, the film, it's really, really good. And so I think you talked about moving together.
Yep.
So what is central to moving together is these 3 pilgrimage holidays where people literally
Yes.
are traipsing from their scatteredness toward Jerusalem. And the importance is you see the other people of your people. This just seeing that you're not alone in your little village, planting your barley or whatever, but you see yourself as a movement, literally.
Mhm.
So,
But there's a debate as that where people were moving from. Were people in the north moving from the north down to Jerusalem,
so
or was it just people in the southern kingdom that were coming to Jerusalem?
that's what I'm.
And so then the shift would become after the destruction, trying to get the people that are outside of Judah to also come down to recognize the centrality of worship in Judah.
It seems like the people in the north had already been on the way of transferring from the sacrifice idea to the prayer idea.
Not quite yet. It's going to take a little bit longer to do that. Okay.
You don't think they were laying the foundation yet?
Not quite yet. Millennia?
Yeah,
The prayer thing?
no, yeah.
Yeah.
And Naomi Janowitz writes about that. I read a lot of this from Davis, CCD.
Yeah, no, another name, yeah.
You know,
All right, so let's talk about the priests. What's a priest? Linda?
I'm sorry, I've been out of
Fine,
town.
fine. What's a daughter of a priest? What's a priest? What do they do?
Teacher.
Serves God.
Serves God, teacher.
Takes care of the people.
Okay,
Tries
takes care of
to
the
be
people.
Between God and the people,
Okay,
one direction, the other direction,
Okay.
back and forth.
okay.
He differentiates between holy and unholy.
Good. We looked at that text last time in Leviticus about differentiating between the sacred and the profane, between the pure and the impure. Stan?
They do sacrifices.
They do sacrifices, yeah.
It's an inherited job, only for men.
Maybe. Maybe it's an inherited job. We think about it as an inherited job, but how did one become a priest?
Corruption or inherited?
Could be. Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. Corruption or inherited.
You're either a descendant of Aaron,
Mm-hmm.
or you're somehow attached to the priesthood.
Good. So you either become a descendant of a particular person who was a priest. I'm going to hold on the Aaron thing for just a second. Or you get linked to a particular group whereby you might adopt the practices of and learn about becoming a priest, which might actually ruin the joke that you might be able to learn to be a priest rather than be inherited because because your father was a priest. So who are the priests that we know about in Jewish tradition?
Moses and Aaron.
You usually say Moses and Aaron. But I have to say there's actually much earlier versions of priests in our story, long before we even get to Moses and Aaron. Did you know that Joseph was married to a priestess in Egypt? Yeah, she was a priestess, right? She was the daughter of a priest. Okay? There's actually several references to priest or priest-like service. And then at the very beginning of our story in Exodus, Moses runs away after killing the Egyptian, and who does he marry?
The daughter
The daughter of a priest. So I don't get it. You said Moses and Aaron, but there seem to be priests in our story that exist long before we even get to Moses and Aaron.
They're not Israelite priests.
They're not Israelite priests, and we could even make the argument that Moses and Aaron are not priests. They don't start as priests, they become priests. Okay, so if we were starting at the top of the food chain, who would be on top for the priests?
Aaron.
I go further. Okay. What? I would start with the tribe of Levi. Okay? And we know that Levi has several children. If you want to just look for just a quick minute, we're going to review this. We've done it before, but we're just going to look at it again. Look on page 354, chapter 6 of Exodus. I'm on 354 and 355.
Verse.
I'm on verses 17, 18, 19. So I'm going to look specifically at Kahat. Kahat has Amram. He's got Yitzhar. He's got Hebron. And Uzziel. Okay? And then Merari has Machli and Mushi. He was. He's a Japanese priest.
Mushi eat sushi.
Yeah, twin-
Mushi had sushi,
yeah,
right?
yeah, it's a twin cousin.
Okay, and then Gershon had his kids too. And then if I'm going to pull Amram over for just a second, Amram has who?
Moses.
Aaron, Miriam, and Moses.
Doesn't say that. We know it, but.
We know, yeah, it actually doesn't say anything about Miriam, but we know that. And we know that Yitzhar here. Who are Yitzhar's kids? Korach, Nepheg, and
Zichri.
Zichri?
Yeah, Zichri.
Okay. Okay, and then we also have, let's see here.
Zero.
No, I'm not so interested for now. Let's see if there's anyone else that needs to be discussed. Ben Aharon Makam. Okay, so let's just stop at this for now. Okay, in this group,
Right, yeah.
who is a priest?
The sons of Levi.
Okay, hold on one second. What'd you say?
The sons of Levi.
All right, the sons of Levi. What does that mean? They're Levites or they're priests? They're the same thing?
Is it the same?
Is it the same thing? No, I know.
Are all Levites priests or just all priests are Levites?
Are all priests Levites or are all Levites priests?
All priests are Levites.
All priests are Levites.
All Levites, not,
But not all Levites are priests. Very
I see.
confusing. It's a whole math formula, okay? Now, Stan, what did you say? Repeat what you just said.
Maybe they're all priests.
Maybe they're all priests. I want to make an argument for a moment that out of this whole thing, everyone is a priest. And that each line creates its own kind of priests. So, Aaron creates Aaronid priests, and Moses creates Mushite priests. Now,
But
What-
he wasn't a priest, his
Who?
wife was a priest, Moses.
Moses' wife was a priest from a different tribe. Not only a different tribe, but different people.
Midianites.
He's a Midianite. She's a Midianite priestess. So Moses is married to Tzipporah.
Not a Jewish.
Tzipporah, say hi over here.
I,
That's Tzipporah. Okay? All right. And Tzipporah is the daughter of a Midianite priest. We don't know that much about Jethro in terms of where he gets his priestly status from. Okay? But in our story, who's the leader?
Moses.
Moses of Israel, of the people, of the Israelite people. Moses is the leader. But who's the priest?
Aaron.
Are you sure?
that's what we've come to know and love through these many movies.
Good, that's what we've been told to love. So if I were to jump ahead several hundred years from the Torah narrative, which line of priestliness wins?
Aaron.
This line wins. Which you could make the argument, they're the ones responsible for what happens after 587-86. Meaning, after the destruction of the temple, after the temple has been rebuilt, after we centralize Jewish worship around God Yahweh, the group of priests that are trying to keep this whole thing intact, that survive this whole long family tree, are actually Aaron's priests. By the way, today, when we ask who is a priest or not a priest, and you say, I'm a priest because my father was a priest, which line are we going through? Aaron. But in our story, in the Torah, who's the leader?
Moses.
Moses is the leader. And actually, Korach is going to come and he's going to challenge this whole thing and say, I'm also a priest. I'm also holy. Go look at the Korach story for just a second. Turn down to Bamidbar, to the book of Numbers, the very beginning of the portion, which is page 861.
What chapter?
Chapter 16, Deuteronomy. I'm sorry, of Numbers. Numbers, excuse me.
Did you say 861?
860.
If you look, it's on page 268. in the Friedman book if you're there?
260.
You want to look there?
Yeah, this one is 860 in this book. Yeah, 860.
No, that's not right.
All right.
861.
It says the opening lines, Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kehat ben Levi. So just in case you didn't know who Korach was, let me start by giving you my yichus. Everyone know what yichus is?
Yes.
What's yichus?
No.
That's your
Yes, sir.
hereditary. Your
Yes, sir.
heredity. You're the people who come before you. Okay. Vayikach what's the ones who just got Meghan Markle and what Prince Harry? They got yichus. Right? They got a long, they're probably gonna have beautiful kids too. But okay. Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kahat, the son of Levi. I just want you to know who I am in starting this story. Comes with a few other people. Datan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Pelet, who were descendants of Reuben. Why is it important to know that they are descendants of Reuben? Who is Reuben?
Firstborn, the oldest.
He is the firstborn of
Jacob.
Jacob with Leah.
Yeah.
So the true firstborn, as opposed to Joseph, who's also the firstborn, but of Jacob and Rachel. Okay, they come, Vayakumu lifnei Moshe. They come up before Moses, Va'anashim b'nei Yisrael, Chamishim u'matayim. They kind of stage a little revolt with 250 people. Who are they? They are the Nisi'ei Edah, Kriyei Moed Anshe Shem. They go in front of all of these people with heads of the assembly, men of repute, and they combine against Moses and Aaron. They say to them, "You have gone too far. Rav lachem, ki kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim. You are all holy, uvetocham Adonai, and in your midst is Yahweh, is Yud He Vav He. Madua titnasu al kahal Adonai. Why do you raise yourselves above the Lord's congregation?" What is their problem? What is their beef? Stan?
They're saying, hey, who made you priest?
That's exactly right. Or let's say it a different way. Go ahead. What were you going to say in my comment?
That's what he said. Go ahead.
Why is it that your being priest is better than my being priest?
Right.
Why are you saying that I'm not a priest? They actually use the words Nisi'ei Edah. They're the chieftains, the head people. Right? What's a priest? A priest is someone who has a different level of power or responsibility in the community. Why are you better than me? We're all from the same cloth. Yeah?
So I always interpret this a little differently, probably incorrectly, in that they're saying, we're a community of holy people. So since we're all holy, what makes you holier than thou?
Yes. So that's one way to interpret it, which would be a really lovely way to interpret it if they were actually speaking on behalf of the community.
Right.
What it doesn't appear to be is that they're not actually getting the entire community to go say, Moses and Aaron, we got a problem, let's talk about it, but rather them separating themselves from the community, 250 of them, to say, we really feel like we deserve something that we didn't get here. It starts off nice.
It starts off nice because it not only includes Levites, but it includes Reubenites,
Yes.
which would suggest that it's broader than just the Levites.
Yes. Well, it's anyone who in theory could have a position of power.
Right.
Look who else comes with them. It's 250 Nisi'ei Edah, the chieftains of the people.
Right.
So it's every possible person who could in theory have a position of power. Yeah.
It seems to me that they're just justifying their jealousy.
How so?
Well, they see Moses having all the power and authority, and they don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
So why can't we have some?
Yeah.
But they don't seem, the only justification they have is ancestry.
Yep.
Nothing else. Not that they're in any other way more deserving of authority.
Okay.
Are the 250 really putting themselves above everybody else? Reading Friedman's translation, it says in verse 3, you have much, because all of the congregation, all of them are holy, and Yud He Vav He is among them.
Yes.
So it's not just the 250, the 250 are speaking
That is exactly
on
right.
the part of everybody.
That is right. Well, at least that's what their claim is.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
I'm just confused about names here.
Yeah.
Korach, I thought was the son of Aaron,
No.
who brought the alien fire.
No. So Aaron has 4 kids. Aaron's kids are Nadav,
Abihu,
Abihu,
Eleazar,
Eleazar, Itamar.
Okay, sorry.
Okay? These guys bring the alien fire, and then Eleazar and Itamar take over. Okay? But Aaron, Moses, and Korach are first cousins. They're all coming from a place where their dad and their dad are brothers. And so they're making a claim. Why is it, and this is where it's confusing, is it we're really all holy, so why are you separating yourselves? Or is it really, what I really have to say to you is, why am I not the leader of the people? Why am I not the priest?
Isn't that a little ridiculous given the history that Moses was the one who spoke to the Pharaoh and Aaron and the burning bush and leading them across? I mean, they had done so much already, which would support their claim to
Yep.
be the leader.
Totally.
And Korach is coming in rather late. I mean, yeah, he's got the lineage.
So I'm glad you said that, because
I'm glad you're glad.
I'm glad you said that because your claim that you just made makes a certain assumption about where you are deriving your understanding of the story.
Okay, so the people who wrote that story in Egypt.
If we read it from the story of the Torah, you are 100% right. Totally they deserve it. Look what Moses did. He took them out of Egypt. Look what Aaron did. He was the mouthpiece. He did all of these other
It goes
things.
back to what Bob said, though. You would think Korach would then be able to say, look what I did when we were in Egypt and how I helped and
Yeah.
look at all the things that I did. Why am I not the leader? But
Yep.
all we're left with is all the wonderful things Aaron and Moses did and Korach just asserting his lineage.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. But
But it's because of who wrote the story.
presumably it's because of who wrote the story. But I want to try to think about it a little bit more broadly. If we were to think about all of the possible people who could be leaders of the Jewish people over the course of history, who's missing from this list? We've got Moses and Aaron as priests and Levites. So we've got Abraham we could throw in there. Who else?
Joseph,
Joseph.
Jacob.
But even in the Joseph story, or in the Jacob story, who does the Torah want us to think is the hero?
David could be.
Yes. And actually, Judah is the hero in the Joseph narrative, and Judah's descendant, way down,
Yehoshua.
is David.
Right. David.
What happens after David?
Supposed to be a Messiah.
It's supposed to be right, exactly. It's supposed to be a Messiah. It's Solomon, and then the kingdom splits. And when the kingdom splits, we've got Jeroboam. Oops. And Rehoboam, very common names today. Okay? They divide the kingdom. And in dividing the kingdom, what does it mean that we have a division of the kingdom? What's happening politically?
We have the centralization in the south, and we have...
That's exactly right. We have a centralization issue in the south, which is Judah, maybe even David. And then we have the northern kingdom doing their own thing, which goes back to the first thing that I drew up on the board, which is the split in terms of how people are practicing.
So they were separate, they came together,
And then they divided again. In dividing, what happens when a people divides?
People have to choose.
People have to choose, and
And
They evolve in different directions.
they evolve in different directions, and ultimately one becomes stronger and the other becomes weaker. Over the course of history, what ends up... What were we going to say?
But they generate their own stories.
They do generate their own stories, including their own stories in relation to God,
Right.
and how you worship that God. What ends up happening over time is that this entire line, almost completely, after the first temple, is totally knocked off. After David moves the capital to Jerusalem, The southern story stays intact, connected to the temple, but everything else that he leaves behind in the north falls by the wayside in 722. And in the south, in the temple, all that we have are the people who are upholding the traditions of the temple. Who are they?
Priests.
The priests. Why does Moses' story fall by the wayside? Why is Moses not lifted up long term as being the person who becomes the heir to all of priesthood? Why is it that the Aaronide line reigns supreme? Stan? Ziva? Go ahead, Ziva.
I'm sure we get different answers that are going to complement each other, but I got stuck when you said they create their own story, which means in the bigger sense they create their own history, their
Yes.
own
Yes.
their own
Yes.
story
That's right.
backwards.
That's right. Yeah, Stan?
Moses is associated, well, the Northern Kingdom associates itself with the Bushite line.
Why?
And
Why?
the Levites, because when the Aaronites took over Jerusalem, it sort of excluded the other Levites.
Yes.
So the Levites who were in the north, they sort of lost power.
That's right. So if the Mushite line associates itself with the Northern Kingdom, it will also be lost when the Northern Kingdom is lost. The Aaronites always stay connected to the temple. They always stay connected, and that's what ends up surviving. And as a result, the Aaronid lineage and story will become the dominant story that comes together to harmonize our Torah. If you look at this little chart again, around the time of the destruction of the first temple is when D and P start to emerge on the scene, which includes the stories about the priests. And actually, much of what is written in Deuteronomy is also priestly in nature, even if the authorship is slightly different. What, if you were to characterize Deuteronomy, how would you summarize in a couple of sentences what the purpose or the goal is of the Deuteronomic story?
Worship Adonai.
Worship Adonai, Yud He Vav He. What else?
Don't centralization in Jerusalem.
Centralization, right? Getting all of the people, we're going to call it getting all the people to the Holy Land, but in this case, centralization into the Southern Kingdom. What else?
And the
Lots.
temple, first the tabernacle and then the...
Yep. But lots and lots of laws,
Yeah.
right? Treating the stranger, and in particular, what does it mean to treat the stranger or the resident alien in a particular way? Why would Deuteronomy emphasize that? Historically, politically?
Well, once the Israelites returned from exile in Babylon, they were living amongst strangers.
Yes. Not only that, but they're living amongst people who were in the Northern Kingdom, who were practicing a particular way, and now they're bringing them in to teach them to practice their way. So it's possible that we're also thinking about what to do not just with people who are not like them, but also people who are like them, who are coming back.
When the Israelites returned from
Exile?
exile, they find a population that's really not practicing properly, according to them.
Yep.
And one of the things I think they do is they tell the men that they have to divorce their wives because they're not proper Israelites.
Proper marriages, right?
So they don't they come in and they say, we're the bosses, and by the way, everything you were doing is wrong.
Right.
And if you want to really conform to our way of doing things, you have to give up everything that you had and essentially convert.
Right, so that puts it in the pejorative. Another way of saying is we're going to welcome them in and try to make them worship and practice the right way.
Okay.
But yes, that's
Reminded
true.
of a cartoon I saw. Someone who looks like Moses holding up a sign saying, Yahweh or the highway.
Nice. Nice. Okay, but what's going to happen is the priests, the people that survive all of this narrative,
Yeah.
right, particularly the Aaron priestly line, is going to come back in and look at the story that was and redact it in a way to get it to be what they want it to be. And so the priests end up having a significant amount of influence over what the story that we will read will actually be. If we then go back to Barbara's question, right? But wasn't Moses involved in the Exodus and Aaron involved in the Exodus? Look who the two characters are that emerge as the leaders and the predominant figures of our story. They're Moses and Aaron. Why do we do that? Look who survives. Why is it in Aaron's best interest in the Aaronid tradition to keep the Mushite tradition as a part of our Torah?
Well, because Moses was responsible for the Exodus.
That's true. And?
For one thing, it emphasizes the common genetic background of both of them.
Yep. They're both from the same mishpacha.
But one question I have, or observation perhaps, is that the Bible seems to go into a lot of detail about the sons and grandsons, etc., of Aaron, but not about those of Moses.
That's right. We know virtually nothing about Moses' family for exactly that reason. But Moses stays in here not just because of the Exodus, but it is because of Moses and his relationship with God that Aaron gets his job.
Yeah.
And not only that Aaron gets his job, but he keeps his job. Aaron should have been given the axe a long time ago after the golden calf. But it's because of Moses that Aaron comes to power.
Tell me where, I can't remember. They have the whole ceremony where Moses anoints
Yes.
Aaron as the priest. So it is the ultimate legitimization that Moses is he first anoints him and then
Yep.
he installs him.
Yes.
And then the sons of Aaron get anointed and installed.
That's exactly right. We just read it a couple weeks ago. It's in the beginning of Bamidbar.
Okay.
Is there any evidence of a different version of the Exodus story?
Like the National Geographic version, or the?
It's been written, you mean.
You mean
Okay,
other
so
other textual variances of the
Yeah,
text?
I
of
mean,
it?
we now are learning that the story is the story that we know growing up and we study because, in part because descendants of Aaron
Right.
wrote the story.
Right.
Is there another story?
An alternative version.
Yeah,
It didn't survive.
in those days, in that
Fake
time.
news.
I'm not sure. I know that there were other ancient myths that were written by other civilizations, but it clearly doesn't survive. The only way that we really know that there were other narratives is because of how we study the text and the way it was put together. But not that I'm aware. I'm sure that a historian in that field would know, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
So, I wonder, and I would be interested in your opinion, if this is connected in any way with the idea that Moses wasn't allowed to enter the land.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he wasn't allowed because the Aaronites didn't want him to come in.
And so we can actually take that a step further. Aaron is also not allowed to enter the land. Right? Aaron dies before Moses dies. Why does Aaron not get to go in the land?
Because of the
Because of the golden calf. Why does Moses not get to go into the land?
The water.
Rock,
What specifically about the rock?
instead of telling it.
Right, so there's two different interpretations. Some say it was because he hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock. But the reason that he hits the rock is because he's angry with the people. And in that moment of anger, he doesn't attribute the blessing of water coming out of the rock, issuing from the rock to God.
Just though he calls it himself.
It's as if he causes it himself. So in playing God, right, that's his punishment, if you will. And most of the Israelites don't make it into Israel because of the sin of the spies, which is going to come up in another week or so. So there's lots of different reasons. But what we don't know is what happens to Moses' lineage afterward. The last story we have about Moses' mishpacha is the story where Aaron and Miriam come to talk to Moses about the Cushite woman, whom we don't know who she is, we don't know what her name is, we just know that she's Cushite. Cush could mean Midianite, so there's some who speculate that it was Zipporah. But other than that, and knowing the names of his two sons, we know nothing else. But immediately after Nadav and Abihu are killed, after offering that strange fire, who does the text tell us about? Eleazar and Itamar.
The surviving sons.
The surviving Aaronid sons who will resume the priesthood. So yeah, I think you're 100% right that there was a conscious decision in ending Deuteronomy which we're going to study as being a complete add-on later, that it was also a way of making sure that we knew which line would stay on. And it supports the system of worship that will become the dominant one, not really in the first, I mean, it is in the first temple, but specifically in the second temple period. That whole priestly set of
It'd be
worship.
great novel to imagine a time when this was being written and then there were these other guys over here who were writing it
Yeah?
from a different perspective.
Yeah. So sorry, Stan. To your question about the anointing, right? That chapter 8 of Leviticus in the Parshat Tzav, which is all about the anointing oil of Moses making Aaron the priest. So there's a very specific reference in the text to Moses essentially investing or ordaining Aaron as the priest, and then as soon as he does that, he blesses the people. Okay, so we need Moses in order to legitimize Aaron's authority, if you will.
So I couldn't remember if it was a Leviticus text because it makes perfect sense that the priests write about the anointing.
Yeah.
So why was he anointed rather than killed? Because, you know, the golden calf seems to be a big deal. So, and as you said, you know, it seems as though he should have, in effect, lost his job.
Yeah.
But instead, the position is actually legitimized and finalized. And
Let's think about what would happen. If Aaron got the axe right after the golden calf, what would it have done to our narrative?
Well, they could have found somebody else.
Right, so they could have found, like, you know, an understudy to just kind of swoop in.
Korah.
Could have been Korah. Well, what's the,
Miriam?
could have been, well, why can't it be Miriam?
she's a woman.
Maybe, but why else? We actually don't know if Miriam is officially in the Mishpacha.
Well, how about that guy that was the first to step in?
Hold on a second. Miriam is not officially mentioned in the early narrative of the Exodus as being Moses'
Okay.
sister.
Oh, okay.
Right? It either talks about the two women, the mother and the sister, as the maidservants, as Shifra and Puah, or it talks about her in a different context, but it doesn't necessarily officially refer to her as like them being brother and sister. It's actually same thing true with.
Cut like everything else in the Bible. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, everything else is clear cut. Come on, Barbara. By the way, it's not even clear that Moses is officially the brother of Miriam and Aaron. If Miriam and Aaron we know are brother and sister, it's not clear that Moses was officially part of that family either. Right? How do we know that? How do we know that it's possible that Moses was actually not part of the same family?
Because the name.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was going to say that he could have been Egyptian.
So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that the two women that are the maidservants, the Shifra and Puah, and then the mother and daughter who set in motion Moses being put into the river and then drawn out, you know, which is the play on the word of his name, by the daughter of Pharaoh, are unnamed women. It doesn't actually say their names in the story. So there's the possibility to say they're actually two different people. We don't do that. The commentaries are very quick to dismiss that argument, but that's what happens. Okay, yeah.
It's sort of interesting, you look at the very beginning of the Torah, and we have this, what I'm looking at is the dynamics of how brothers, the story of brothers. You want to write
Yes.
a book about the story of brothers. We've got Cain killing Abel, and then
Jacob and Esau,
but
Isaac and
Abraham
Ishmael.
Isaac and
Right.
Ishmael.
Joseph and his brothers.
Right, Joseph and his brothers. Sibling rivalry is a very common thread. And by the way, sibling rivalry is not just about the rivalry. It's about who is oldest versus youngest, who gets the inheritance versus doesn't, which is also about power and control. We didn't even talk about this, but who technically is the oldest?
Aaron.
So it would also make sense from a line of the primogenitor line of, you know, who gets the inheritance, that Aaron also reigns supreme. Unlike in the stories of Jacob and Esau, right? Jacob becomes Israel, he somehow rises up from the bottom, but his is complicated too. Yeah.
Just
point of confusion.
There's many.
Exodus 2,
Yep.
and a man from the house of Levi
Yep.
went out and took a daughter of Levi.
Yep.
And the woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and she saw him, and it was good. It suggests
It totally does.
that Moses is the son
Yep. Of
who is
Levi.
of Levi.
Yeah, but is it the same mom and dad that were also the same mom and dad to Aaron and to Miriam?
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know. It's not clear in the text. It does suggest that. All right, we'll stop here.